So a lot of work in educational technology is around trying to create advanced learning environments to try to make learning more and more effective. And I think that there are definitely contexts where this is true. I think particularly where you need to create safe space for students, and I think that's one of the first considerations you should have. So I work in the medical community now. That's one of those places whenever students are doing any work online, we have to create a reasonably safe space. Both the material we work with and the interactions we can expect from our students are ones that need to be done inside of a space where they can feel like they can give their opinions, where some of the content we have, frankly, is not something that you would necessarily post on the internet for a variety of medical reasons. And that is true of an awful lot of professions. It's also true whenever your students are doing deep personal reflection. So I think you need to have an advanced interactive space. I do think, however, that it's very difficult to create an advanced learning environment that doesn't end up controlling what you can do with learning. So all the way back to Knowledge Forum from the late 1990s, which was a project out of the University of Toronto. It was probably the most advanced learning technology platform of its time. It still exists now if you're interested in checking it out. But what it's meant to do is track every connection that a student does and see how knowledge gets made inside of things like discussion forums and stuff. And if you imagine that from the late 90s, early 2000s, it's an amazing piece of technology. The problem is that the training required to get somebody to use it effectively, both as a teacher and as a student, was so high that it impeded adoption, and it really became a cumbersome piece of technology to use. And that has been my experience with most advanced. I mean, first of all, the internet is an insanely advanced learning environment in and of itself. And I would say that when we look at the digital practices we want students to acquire, the effective use of the internet, both from a personal knowledge management standpoint, like how I manage myself through the internet, and also from a collaborative networking standpoint, is maybe the most important digital literacy they can get to. So then you end up saying, well, how do I, as an educator, support my students? How do I track my students? How do I evaluate my students if I think of the internet as platform? Well, the answer to that is that you teach them how to do personal knowledge management. So if you say to your students that you're only going to evaluate, that is, give grades that give them a mark, for content that they not only do online, but then find some way to be able to organize themselves to be able to deliver to you, then you're forcing them to create their own personal learning environment, right? And that personal learning environment may be something that is cobbled together inside of a online document system like Google Docs or something, and it may be something that they craft out or choose. But the more that we create advanced learning environments for them, the less literacy they actually develop about how the internet actually works. And for me, the bigger problem is what you do with an advanced learning environment whenever the students leave it. So if I am working inside an environment and I make a number of connections, and I have built these environments for people before, I've built them in content management software, I've built them in course management software, I've built them from scratch. Every time you end up with a challenge of what to do with not only the student content, because forget about content for a second, what do you do with the connections? Because the connections don't belong to anybody. Students, their own content, they're responsible for it, they can keep it themselves. If I turn off a learning platform, that's their responsibility, but the connections are real things between people, but they're not things you can save. They don't export from a system. So overall, I think the lesson that I have coming out of this is that it's far more rewarding for students and far more sustainable in the long term to give up the quest for the advanced learning environment and work towards personal knowledge management, getting students to organize their own work. That being said, I think the most interesting work on advanced learning environments right now is being done with APIs. So if you look at the concept of personal API, where you yourself have a platform that connects all of your pieces together and integrates all the platforms into something that you own, I don't think we've solved that problem yet. And I know that most of the corporate social media, at least platforms, change their API access so often that it's difficult to manage. But there's something really interesting about a personal layer to the internet. That's something that a student can actually maintain themselves, that sort of becomes both portfolio and also dashboard for what they're actually doing.